What happens in the sky affects life down here on Earth. The Celestial Compass shows you how and guides your way with astrology you can use from professional astrologer Kathy Beal. Every episode features her light-hearted, practical forecasts and navigational tips, blended with humor, optimism, and a love of patterns, symbolism, and pop culture references. Kathy translates technicalities into concepts that apply to real life. You'll learn how the current moment ties to where we've been, from the recent past to cycles that last happened years ago, and get a look at where we're heading. And much more, from special topics to special guests. The Celestial Compass, enlightening, entertaining, and empowering. Here's your host, Kathy Beal.
Greetings, Earthlings. This is Kathy Beal of EmpowermentUnlimited.net with another exciting episode of Celestial Compass. Remember that my forecasts are always available to you at omtimes.com, monthly and mooncasts, and they're also at my website, EmpowermentUnlimited.net, where you will also hear a weekly podcast. And all these are also on my YouTube channel, Professional Aquarian. Yes, I am one, and yes, I recently had a birthday. I want to just update the astrological forecast for the rest of the month before we get into today's really fun topic. There are two big influences that are going to take us out into March. The first one is today, the Pisces new moon, which has an out-of-sign conjunction to Saturn, the planet of adulting, structure, order, the status quo, and this kind of grounds the loosey-goosey energy of Pisces, which opens us to incredible grace and inspiration and connectedness to everything. But with Saturn being in the mix, we have the opportunity to keep our feet on the ground and not go under. And this kind of presages what's going to happen next month when Saturn moves into the sign of Pisces, where the new moon currently is. So we're getting kind of a foretaste of what the energies are going to be like for the next couple of years after Saturn makes that switch. The second big event is antithetical to this, and that is Venus moving into Aries. Venus is the social director of the skies. She rules how we interact with each other, what we desire at any given time. And Aries is huntress mode. This is Wonder Woman time. This is not sitting around staring at our toes in the tub and having sweet little bubble baths, but being really energized to go after what we want. Venus ordinarily has the energy of lying on her sofa and wanting somebody else to bring her what she wants. When she's in Aries, she isn't waiting for anybody. She is running after what she wants, doesn't care what toes she runs over to get it, and certainly isn't going to wait for someone else to do it for her. So, very exciting and complicated mix of energies for seeing our way out of the month. And now, two of my big passions are coming together in this episode. We are talking about the interplay between astrology and the tarot with a fascinating author and tarot teacher, Laetitia Barbier. She is the author of Tarot and Divination Cards, a visual archive. I have it in my hands. It's available in ebook form, but I encourage all you tarot and image junkies to get it in physical form because it's just so weighty and wonderful and magnificent. You're going to want to hold it and not just look at it on a screen. She's French-born, an independent scholar, as well as a professional tarot reader and teacher. She earned a bachelor's degree in art history from La Sorbonne University Paris in 2009. She has worked with Morbid Anatomy since 2011 as a programming director, head librarian, and occasional curator. She has lectured, taught, and read cards for various cultural institutions such as Greenwood Cemetery, Fotografiska New York, the College of Psychic Studies in London, and the Montclair Art Museum, which is where we met. Welcome, Laetitia.
Well, thank you so much for having me today. I'm really, really excited and honored.
Oh, well, the input that you had, we met at an event at the Montclair Art Museum that was focused around the tarot with as its centerpiece a very special deck that a local artist had created during the course of COVID, and other images were put up, and your commentary was just so magnificent that I said, "Who is this? I must know this person." Also, I just want to throw out that about 10 or 15 years ago, I did a couple of events on tarot at a really interesting collective space called Observatory. And
Oh, wow.
one of the best sentences of my entire life occurred before one of my speeches when someone came up to me and said, "Your pizza is in the Morbid Anatomy library." How often do you hear a sentence like that?
I remember the observatory very well. It's one of those project. Like I came from France, so if I stayed in New York, it's because I thought that the observatory and the library and all this collective of artists and thinker had created this little corner of the world just dedicated to arcane knowledge and niche topics and art and sensibility, like in ways sensibilities that were so different that it made me stay. It made me stay. So and
Made
here I
you
am.
stay. Oh.
Yeah.
Well, let's go further back than that. Can you tell us, how did you come to the tarot? How did you find the
Uh,
cards?
so yeah, it's a. I'm gonna try to make it as short as possible because it's a long, convoluted story. But I was born in France, and so in France we have a very strong tarot culture. People read the Tarot de Marseille, which is like a game of card that is still played to some extent. And then the deck itself, like kind of crystallized. The models have crystallized around the 17th century, but was kind of hammered in the 18th century as the esoteric tarot for reasons that we can talk about later, that are not necessarily historical and not necessarily the right one. It was just proclaimed, I and so like tarot is something that people do. Like there's a huge culture of folk magic and fortune telling in France, and it's just part of like everyday life. So when I was a kid, my mom, when I was very, very small, my mom used to drive me back from school when I was 6. I was finishing school around 4 p.m. and on the radio, there was a show in which a man, his name is Didier Derlich. He was a famous, very mediatic um, astrologer, tarot reader. Didier Derlich used to read cards live on the radio, and so I was 6. I didn't know how to read a book, or didn't learn how to read yet anything, let alone words. And so it was because it was the radio. He pulled a card and he was describing them, and so like he was saying all those like very enigmatic names, like the La Maison Dieu, the Tower, and the Hangman, and the Empress reversed. And for some reason, those images, they really crystallized in my head in a very fascinating way. Like that just the expression of those cards, the mention of those cards, really fueled my imagination, and I became familiar with those cards without understanding what they were and what they looked like either. And then you fast forward, maybe like 6 years later. I'm older. I'm like 12, 11, 12, and my mom doesn't pick me up at school anymore because I'm a teen, and I'm orgueillous. I'm prideful. But I was able to take the bus with my friends, and on my way to the bus, we passed every day a tobacconist store that had well, pipes, tobacco, cigarettes, but also games, like poker games and chess games. And in the window, they had a tarot deck. And I saw the deck and I thought, oh my God, this is it. This is and I remember it was a Grimaud deck from the 90s. So it had the magician, the Bachelor card in the front, a very enigmatic man with this little table slightly at an angle and this beautiful hat. And I was like, that's the deck that the witchy guy on the radio used to give fortune. And so I think I asked my mom to get it for me for a birthday or a communion gift or something. And I got that deck, and it served me well during my old teens. And I was very obsessed by it when I was a teen. I was probably a very terrible tarot reader too. And it's only when I was in my 20s, I had a roommate that was raised in Great Britain. And so we lived together, we're best friends. And every Sunday we would read cards to one another. And so she read the Rider-Waite-Smith, and I read with the Tarot de Marseille. And then I was kind of like, wait a minute, what is this cool deck you have? I want this. And so I got myself a Rider-Waite-Smith, which at the time was hard to find. I got it in London, I think. And that became my favorite deck. And then, long story short, I'm not going to talk about the ins and outs, but after my 20s, I started to read more about it, and that became part of my spiritual practice in general. I became a professional very recently, maybe like 6 years ago, I think. But I've read cards all my life, and I've always had an interest in very strong iconography, which is why I started to do art history in the first place. So that was, kind of a perfect symbiosis of all the things I loved in one.
So how is it that you use the deck? Because that's evolved, right? It started from here's this cool thing to, I suspect, something quite a bit more.
Well, yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Like that's the thing. I have the, I like to do research. That's my thing. I like to read books. I'm not necessarily what you'd call an academic, although I went to the university, and I just have like a slight, kind of a self-taught pattern for a lot of stuff. And so like the tarot has been part of my spiritual practice for a very long time. Not necessarily reading the cards, but like using them for, like for like meditation, or like I used to make altars. I still do, but I used to basically use them as like, like image or icon to pray or design things around them. But then I was just like, like my background is in art history, so I started to be interested in it, in the tarot as a cultural object as well, and I tried to understand what made that game a spirited game on an historical level, and so although it's been part of my like spiritual life, like only recently, I'll say, maybe like the last decade, I just started to be more interested in what that pack of cards means for other people, and so use it as an object of study, both for, I guess, esoteric practices, if you can talk about that. I guess that's not the term I will use. I guess spiritual practice is always the one that I boil down to, but I was always interested in trying to understand what people were doing with those cards, and so part of the way I learned, or I relearned to use them, is first through reading a lot about it and realizing that maybe, like, one of the things that I came down to is that those cards have been circulating as an esoteric tool for, I guess, the 18th century. That's historically, that's the date we have. And the tradition keeps being reinvented again and again. 18th century, we have Courte de Gébelin, we have Eteia. We have Mademoiselle Lenormand, who was not technically reading tarot; she was reading playing cards and also reading palms. But I was just interested in understanding how those games were developed, and what kind of fortune, what that idea of fortune means, and what people. What soulful information people found in it. And I think that after I did all this, I realized that, like maybe the point is not so much to follow any of those traditions. The point is to find an instinctive way to use them, to work them. So I would say my practice is mostly an intuitive practice. Doesn't mean that I just make shit up, That's but it's very much the way I like to tell people as I teach. It's the same way. When you do, I was recently listening to this great interview of a trumpet player, Ibrahim Massouf, which I love, and he was basically saying how he teaches improvisation to his students, and it's very hard because very often when you learn an instrument, you're classically trained, and part of that work is to unlearn a lot of things, and so that's what I'm trying to. I'm not saying I'm trying to, spit on, 300, more than that, centuries of esoteric tradition. It's just that I think that I'm trying to show people by showing them historical example that things have been reinvented again and again. And that's why tarot is such an incredible device, because we as a civilization project whatever we need, what needs to, the tarot, what void needs to, the tarot to be filling. And so I believe that my approach is very much related to what you call image magic. I believe that image of power. I believe that that's why every civilization try to create powerful images that will capture the spirit, the soul that they were trying to worship or call for, and a tarot has that capacity of like being an embodiment of something ethereal and divine. You're truly.
And this is a good point for our first break. So hang in there, everybody. We're going to come back very shortly with a lot more. Welcome back to Celestial Compass. We are talking today with Laetitia Barbier, and I will get your name right before the show is over. And we've been talking about how you came to the tarot, and I am curious. You're very image oriented. What kind of decks do you like? Do you mostly choose a deck because of the beauty or the intriguing nature of the images on it?
Well, yeah, so I like to say it's kind of a joke, but I'm a very monogamous tarot reader. Just here's the thing. I collect everything else. I collect so many stuff, objects and books and antiques, and so bizarrely enough, I don't have that many decks. I have maybe, I don't know, a dozen of decks because people are very sweet and then give them to me. But technically, I only read with the Rider-Waite-Smith, which is the classic Anglo-Saxon deck. I also read occasionally with the Carnival of the End of the World, a deck that was created by the photographic duet Nicholas Kahn and Richard Selznick. But other than that, I just read with the Rider-Waite-Smith, and it's interesting because as I just said before, I come from a very different tarot culture. In France, like if people read the Marseille, like now there is a little more, people are like my generation, a little more open-minded to try to read with other decks, for sure. But I'm just fascinated by Pamela Coleman-Smith's work, and I feel like her artistic sensibility is something that really speaks strongly to me because I have a slight kind of pre-Raphaelite sensibility. I've always enjoyed, like I want to say Art Nouveau and 19th century, like symbolist work. And somehow, although her work is very different, like really, conjure Japanese ukido-e and others are kind of slightly Orientalist sometimes sensibilities. I'm just fascinated by her work, and for me, what's fascinating is how, like her birthday was last week. She was born on the 15th, I think, the 15th of February, and so I had the opportunity to write a little article about her, and the thing I wanted to do was to show some of her other images because she was such a prolific illustrator, and one of the things that's so remarkable about the tarot deck she created is this this the character have this non-emotional way to behave on the image, and it's like she was absolutely capable of creating emotional figures, and some of her artistic work is so romantic and 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 psychologized, I guess but there is something about the tarot where she allowed to mute certain aspects, and through a very kind of almost minimalist line work, convey such powerful stories. And I'm just fascinated by that deck, I don't want to, like, be old fashioned, but I know, and it's just, of course, everyone should, is different, and there is so many incredible deck out there. We met at the Montclair to celebrate Laurie Field's incredible Tiger Tarot, and like here's a deck that is just so mind blowing, made with like drawings and collage, and Laurie's such a completely visionary, like artist, and of course the cards are inspiring to me, but I don't know, like I've got a longing for Pamela. There's something about what she allowed in that deck that seems still, to fascinate me.
I find it a very clear and neutral deck. I fought using it for decades. It was not my
Yeah,
first deck. I had a business
yeah,
partner who took it as a personal offense that I was teaching people how to read tarot and did not use
uh-huh,
that deck. So she
yeah,
gave it to me, so I used it as a teaching deck. But now I have
mhm,
found it's a real clear, neutral way to communicate with people you do not know. I find it a
yeah,
really easy deck to use out in public.
yeah,
If I'm so, yeah, I understand
yeah.
very much.
Absolutely, and that's the thing. It's also the deck that speaks tarot. Like I went to Thailand a couple of years ago. I was just so surprised because in one of the temple there was a guy who was reading cards. And it's just so funny because in Thailand cards are not legal. There is because they're associated with gambling and viceful behavior, and so there's no culture of cartomancy, but yet in that temple there was a guy who was reading the Rider-Waite-Smith, and of course I gave him some money because I really wanted to get a Thailand reading with the Rider-Waite-Smith, and I photographed his stall because I thought it was so funny to see her deck, her images, and then the interpretation, which were like so original, completely removed from the way I understand it and the way we Westerners understand that deck. But it was such a fascinating deck, and I think that, as you said, there's something neutral. I think there's something neutral and inviting as well. Like I think sometimes the Marseille, because of the pip card, all those suit cards that are abstract, like the six of coins. Well, you don't have like a figurative scenes on it. You have just six coins and some flower adornment as well on the Marseille card. So people find it a lot harder to read. But I've went all around the world, and I've always found someone reading the Rider-Waite-Smith, and I can tell you that those people never heard about Pamela Coleman Smith, never heard about the Golden Dawn, never heard about the correspondence system, about the cards, astrology, the Kabbalah. Yet they just own that deck, and they made something. The reading they gave me sometimes were very powerful, and I found that deck allows for this because it's something that we can use as part of a tradition, but it's also something that we can reclaim for ourselves.
Now, you've brought up correspondences, Order of the Golden
Mm-hmm.
Dawn. This is a great segue point to the overlap between tarot and astrology. Um, the first and obvious one is that the elements show up in the different suits.
Mm-hmm.
Would you agree with that? So
Well,
there,
yeah,
there.
yeah. Tell me.
No, I was just going to say four suits. Um, Wands can be seen as equating with fire, swords with air, pentacles with earth, cups with water. Seems very
Yeah.
basic there, but it goes a lot more than that, a lot more than the elemental correlations. Just uh, there aren't there uh, actual correlations between planets and specific cards and zodiac signs and specific cards?
Well, so here's, here I'm just going to switch to historian mode because I think
Please
that's the
do.
best way, that's the best answer I can give you. When you study, the different systems from the people have been working on, like I'm talking about, like for example, French occultist Eliphas Lévy or Papus or the Golden Dawn, no one's agree. No one agrees. So there is,
That's
like
beautiful.
and I feel like, for me, I see it as an invitation to be able to kind of recreate, invent systems or play with the idea of systems the way we want. Like one of the big things that happened, which I think is one of my favorite stories. Like the Eliphas Lévy was this prominent French occultist, and he wrote a book that became very important in the 1850s, I think, 1852, 54, called Ritual and Dogma of High Magic. I think that's the English translation of it. It's a great book. It's a massive book, but he was a great writer, and so it's actually very funny to read. I personally enjoyed to read it as almost like a poetic work. But so he details, he's a very important occultist because he's the first one who managed to create um, a cohesive system of correspondence between different esoteric traditions. Astrology, Hermetic Kabbalah, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the person, so the book is going to have a huge influence on the occult world, the occult revival in France, but also in Great Britain. One of the reasons his work gets picked up in Great Britain is because his translator was no else than Arthur Edward Waite, the man who will become the instigator of the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. And so it's just interesting to see that basically the tarot as a game was not played in Great Britain. And so when early esotericists, the MacDougall Matters and Westcott and all that, started to read the work of French occultists, they had no understanding of what those images were. And so you have those very beautiful drawing by Westcott about, the world card, and they're only basing their visual description from what the text described the images like. Eliphas Lévy's book only has 2 tarot cards illustrated in it, which is the Devil and the Chariot with the 2 Sphinx. And so, you can see the 2 cards kind of match, and then the rest is complete fantasy. And I think this is the thing that I'm interested in. It's not so much the idea that we create systems. We as intellectual animals, we have this longing for things to kind of match the box. And I think that personally, I do not use astrology in so much in my reading because not because I'm a pompous asshole. It's just because I do not have the mathematical mind to appreciate the wealth of it. And so, since I'm an extremely visual person, it's easier for me to not work with correspondence system. But for example, I was going to say that, when the Golden Dawn created this kind of early work with using tarot as a meditative tool, they inverted the justice and the strength card. So in the Tarot de Marseille, the cards are 8 and 11, and then in the Rider-Waite-Smith, it's 11 for justice and 8 for the strength card, and they base that on their own understanding of the astrological correspondence. So somehow, if they're allowed to kind of reinvent the order of the cards to fit their theory, I think we all should feel free to kind of have that freedom too. It's hard to know. Like some people see, for example, the devil card. They associate it with the Capricorn sign, or some others associate it with the Scorpio sign. And I feel like that I understand where those two people come from, but I also believe that things are kind of fluid. I believe in the fluidity of the mind. I believe that things that we take for granted one day might completely shift because um like the exception confirmed the rule. that's the way I see it. But it's a fascinating system. It's a fascinating topic, and I just find it like it really proves that like we manage to see imagination has no bound. No bound at all.
That's very true. I will point out about the devil, Pamela Coleman Smith's
Yeah.
image of him does have the glyph for Saturn, I think, on his palm,
Uh-huh.
on the palm of the devil.
Uh-huh.
So
So yeah, well,
maybe
so that's the
Ryder
thing.
told her to do that. I mean, it's entirely possible.
Oh, I think like I think the idea about the deck, and when you read what's his name, the pictorial key to the tarot, it's very evident that Waite had very strong opinion about how he wanted the major arcana to look like, and that he, like the main. That's what those things that Mary Greer discussed with great beauty is that like what like what's usually admitted is that he didn't really care for the minor arcana. So like she was able to really own those cards, and her vision was in that basically that new technology of like making figurative image for the major the minor arcana. And that's the thing, of course, the Wade came from the Golden Dawn, and so he believed I think he had a very strong understanding of the tarot, and so we can play by the rules, but we don't have to. And I don't want to say that I'm an anti-system person because it might be misinterpreted, but I believe, I believe that I'm interested in understanding systems because I have a curiosity for the history of tarot. But I also believe that in the context of a reading, when you meet a real human being, um, like the system don't always apply because at the end of the day, tarot is a human experience. It's a human experience, and there is a lot of like there's a lot of speculation around it. But the moment you're in front of a person and you read their cards, you have to be able to kind of throw all your speculation at the window and be present with that person, and not in like some kind of bookish, but like the system is right, and if you can't vibe with it, haha, too bad. It's just it's like there is something to be said about those systems were not necessarily designed for the work of reading cards for other people. They were designed for to use tarot as a as a narrative that speaks about the elevation of the soul or the initiatic process. And so we also have to, like tarot can be used for so many things. Like we also have to figure out what we want to do with it and see what works for us. For the work I do, which is mainly, like my real passion for it comes from, meeting people and then like helping them retelling their stories or realigning with their own stories with the images of the tarot. And I feel like I have to listen more than I have to speak, and so yeah. Anyway.
Well, we're hitting our second break of the show. I hope everyone will please just hang in for a few minutes and we will be back. Welcome back to Celestial Compass. We're talking about the tarot in many, many ways with Laetitia Barbier, who is taking a very interesting and historical and humanistic approach to the cards. I find it interesting looking at the astrological possible overlap or correlations. There have been charts that I have read and attempted to master about the order of the Golden Dawn, correspondences for the different court cards, and I just throw my hand up because after a while
Hmm.
they don't make sense to me, and I have been reading cards for probably longer than you've been alive. And but the sign correlations to various cards do make some sense to me, with the
Hmm.
exception of the moon. Everyone thinks the moon is the moon, and in their system, the moon is Neptune. Like, okay, the moon is Cancer, right? Sure, all
Yeah,
right.
like from an iconography standpoint, you have the crayfish, and I think that it kind of like talks back at it. I just, like this is the thing that also I'm gonna admit, like I come from a I come from a different culture, like the Golden Dawn. Although I read the Rider-Waite Smith, the Golden Dawn is exotic to me because this is not. I don't come from the British revival, and it's also something I try to show with my work, and it's just like the world of tarot is bigger than the Golden Dawn, and there is a lot of countries where people read other cards too than tarot. So I try, I'm not just that to say that I'm not a connoisseur, and as you said, you're probably the expert here. I do not know much about it.
Oh, well, I'm the expert in that I know that there are real limits to what I know about
But
this.
I want
But
let me ask you this. In your work, like do you feel that that astrology and the zodiac, the way we perceive um, the zodiac is sometimes limited, or should I say, I'm just gonna say the word, but like caricatural. Do you feel like sometimes it's limiting? It's limiting.
interesting. Well, I'm sure that there is a that there are cultural parameters that inform all
Yeah.
of this, and there are many different schools of astrology that come out
Yeah.
of different parts of the planet, absolutely, completely different moments in time of human civilization, different ways of approaching what things mean. And my experience of it has been find a system that
Mhm.
consistently works for
Mhm.
you and stick with
Mhm.
that.
Yeah.
And also that there are many different avenues to the same information. Maybe the labels are
Yeah.
different that you come up
Yeah.
with, but
Yeah.
uh, I read cards in addition to reading the stars, and real frequently, very similar information comes through depending on
Yeah.
whether you do a card spread or you look at what's happening in someone's transits.
Yeah, and that's the thing I found so fascinating because I think it's true. I think that somehow it's just a different language. Like I wish I could speak the language of astrology, but I'm not gonna lie. I feel like I'm very limited in some ways because I have other forms of intelligence that doesn't include this one, the one of understanding the I just every time like I have a lot of friends who are very much into astrology and they get very frustrated because I'm speechless. But I'm interested in it. It's so funny because I've not always been sensitive to it, but it caught with me for the past 5 years. Like I had some like really interesting experiences astrologically speaking, um, specifically since I'm in America, where I've never really paid attention to it. I'm not gonna lie, I love to read my horoscopes in the newspaper once in a while when I'm like at the cafe and I drink my little
Right.
espresso. I enjoy it. And then the thing is, I was born on April 20th, so I lived the earliest part of my life believing I was an Aries and always fantasizing of being a Taurus until I got my chart done, and the astrologer told me, "Oh, you're a Taurus. You're just right on the cusp, but at 85, you're born on the Taurus side." And I fist bumped so hard, like, yes, I made it. Venusian school. At last, now it explains all the love for cake and dresses, and
I would have pegged you as a Taurus, actually.
yeah, well, it's just I'm like, are you kidding? I'm like the poster child for tourists. I'm like, I love dressing up. I love eating. I just have so like about like physical pleasure, gathering people, loving through food, loving through object, loving through texture, and I'm a fucking caricature of a tourist. So the more it grows, the more I'm actually realizing that it's not it's not like like whatever limitation I see in astrology, they're kind of catching back on me, and I'm feeling like being an absolute caricature of my sign. It's very interesting. I have to kind of like redefine what astrology feels to me. I had a very funny, I remember many years ago, I just woke up in the middle of the night and I felt compelled. I wanted to eat chocolate. Like, what's happening? I need to eat chocolate right now. And I just went to my kitchen, found chocolate, ate the whole thing, and then I went back to bed. And then I looked online, and I ended up finding out that there was like a new moon in Taurus that night. And I was like, okay, well, maybe that's just this. Okay.
Your body
So
was
anyway,
saying, "Feed me." Yes, got it.
mm, yeah. But to go back to the tarot and astrology, I feel like I feel like we tend to do this. We tend to apply guidelines for things, and then try to find ways. This is the way we humans, we try to find grid of understanding. And I think those grid of understanding, they might make sense to us now, but they might not always necessarily make sense to the next generation or 3 generations after. And so I think although I have great reverence, and like understanding those systems and trying to figure out how they were created, why they were created, and what are the mental process that went behind them. I don't necessarily use them because I feel like as I said earlier, they kind of take away the synchronicity. They take away the intuitive sometimes, and I that's what I try to privilege in the way of reading, where basically, I say that thing, and I say that all the time, but I think it's just like when people ask me what makes a good tarot reader, I answer like, you have to be a good storyteller, and then you also have to have a great lack of memory. And I think that I'm a good tarot reader because I have zero memory for systems, and so when I'm in the context of a reading, the adrenaline, I can't use them because I have to use something else. I can't having to memorize the mechanics of something that is too tight will be detrimental to the human experience at the end.
This reflects the way, this is completely in keeping with the way I teach reading the cards, which is there are 3 rules, and one of them is
Mm-hmm.
nobody reads any books during
Mm-hmm.
the course.
Yeah.
And I make people start reading from the very first session and telling a story based on what they see happening from image to image to image in any
Yeah.
way that it can be, the colors, the directions people are facing, changes in their clothing, the mood, whatever. And a lot of people fight it, and then when you bark at them, they'll suddenly start telling you what they're seeing.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the thing for me. Tarot is really allows us to connect to imagination. I'm a very William Blake oriented person. I believe that imagination conquers all. I believe that that we forget that we have this tool. We use it for problem solving, but we don't use it to tell ourselves stories that allow us to reshape our own stories. And I think that sometimes there is this great quote. Alexander Zhuravsky was a great filmmaker and also a very important tarot scholar. Very often says, people, birds that are born in a cage believe that flying is a disease. And I feel like it really applies to tarot in the sense that sometimes we're so scared of the imagination that we just reject it. And I think that the people who are holding on to the books, it's like, if it's not in a book, it must be it must be wrong. Like if I'm my imagination, my personal sixth sense tell me otherwise, but it's not validated in some other systems. I must be wrong, but it's untrue. At the end of the day, we're all expert on ourselves. And there's a lot of practices in which like we're invited to foster those like inner dialogues with images, trying to get in contact with those different facets of ourselves, and then like when we do that, it's not about being true or wrong. It's about just listening and maybe starting a different pattern of thinking.
And jumping wildly here, can
Hmm.
you tell us about what the guiding force was behind your book, Tarot and Divination Cards: A Visual Archive? How you
Yeah.
chose what would be in here?
Well, yeah, I do. I have a very, I'm obsessed by images. I'm obsessed by images. I have like, I've been always having, I've always had a collection of postcards. I have like always been, my bedroom when I was a kid was always kind of like postered, no wallpaper left, images everywhere. That's something that really pursued me when I was a teen and an early adult. It's like I have a very strong relationship to art. Art museums are my church. I had epiphanies looking at painting, and not because they were just beautiful, but just because there is something within them that allowed me to connect to a part of myself. And of course that's a very long process that allowed me to grow as a human being. But
Hmm.
I feel like nobody can resist a beautiful image. That's why people are all so enthused by Instagram or those social media that are very image based, because people are so seduced by images, and of course we can just be like, oh, it's dangerous, superficial, but there is also something where maybe we should foster that too. Maybe those images that we surround ourselves with, they have a power to inform us of invisible occurrences within us. And so the book is very much about that. The book is my love letter to tarot, in which I unfold completely arbitrary, speculative um, um, history of the card. Of course, it is based in factual history, but I'm just basically kind of like moving around all the iconography of 5 centuries, and I'm trying to find echoes of those cards in other images or other cultural products, whether they're like a T-Rex song to like a David Bowie quote to Hannibal Lecter to the work of Philipp Otto Runge, who was a romantic, like German romantic painter, to Velasquez, to Rihanna. I mean, that's the thing. I believe that I come from a place where I'm very highbrow and lowbrow, and I believe that tarot is too. Tarot is both like the great noble arts, the Golden Dawn, like beautiful, elaborate pageantry and systems that are impeccable. But it's also the fairground lady who's going to read your cards and tell you if you're going to get married or not. And I think that because tarot is both noble and vulgar, and then I think I believe I'm truly that too. I believe we are all made out of that strange paradox, and I wanted the book to represent that the idea that tarot can be like the most beautiful poetic tool ever created, but it's also it allows us to reconnect to our visual culture or contemporary culture in a different way, in a way that it's not just about image, in a way that can actually inspire us and then maybe allow us to see who we are.
Well, I thank you so much for just coming on and talking about wherever this conversation was going to go. Would you please tell people where they can find you? What's your
Yeah,
website?
I'm here. And so I live in Brooklyn, New York. My website is letitiacartomancy.com. You can also find me on Instagram at letitia.cartomancy. And if you're completely lost, you can just Google Laetitia and tarot, and I'm probably gonna pop up. I have red hair, French accent. You'll find me. I'm, I'm like
The,
I'm my own little
the,
world.
the address will be in the show notes also.
Yeah.
And one thing that's interesting about the Instagram feed for those of you listening out there is that almost on a daily basis, some seemingly random image shows up with the
Yeah.
question of what card does this remind you of? And it just sparks conversation. And it's the most astonishing catalog of of ancient and strange images.
Well, thank you. Thank you. It's an old game. Everyone does it, but I just love images. Yeah, that's the thing. I wanted to be able to show more than tarot images. And like, as you said, the conversation it fosters is just fascinating to me.
And it's been fascinating talking with you. I thank you very, very much.
Well,
And
thank
everybody, be next month is going to be a very different time. So get to enjoy your downtime now. And again, you can find my forecasts at omtimes.com and empowermentunlimited.net. And oh, the OMI Awards are still going on in voting, and that goes through March 1st. And I'm pleased to say I'm up for one. So if you're inclined, I thank you. If there are plenty of really good people, please go look. Talk to you next month.